The Wilson family lived in a suburban neighborhood in Columbus, Ohio, and they were a typical middle-class family. Robert Wilson, the father, had worked as a middle manager in manufacturing for 30 years and had successfully retired just last year. Linda, the mother, had worked as a clerk at a local insurance company, but she quit her job when Robert retired, and the two of them were enjoying a relaxed retirement together. These parents had 2 daughters. Margaret worked sporadically as a freelance graphic designer. Emily worked as a beauty consultant in the cosmetics department of an upscale department store downtown. From childhood, Margaret had been a quiet, introverted child. She loved reading books and was passionate about drawing, existing completely apart from the glamorous world. Emily, on the other hand, was born with a natural charm that drew people to her. With her curly blonde hair, big blue eyes, and innate social skills, she had been the center of attention since kindergarten. The parents clearly favored Emily. It wasn't out of malice, but rather seemed like a natural flow. When they looked at Emily's report card, they would say, "Wonderful," and when they looked at Margaret's, they would say, "You need to try a little harder." When Emily's friends came over to play, Linda would welcome them with home-cooked meals, but when Margaret's friends visited, she would tell them to be quiet. After graduating from college, Margaret had worked at a small local advertising agency, but she had gone independent as a freelancer a few years ago. Her income was unstable, and her parents kept telling her to find a more stable job. Emily, meanwhile, had gained the trust of many customers with the beauty knowledge and customer service skills she had developed in her department store job. Her monthly income was more than double Margaret's, and her parents would proudly say, "Emily is truly exceptional." In the midst of all this, news came of Emily's engagement. Her fiancé was a man named James Painter, an investment consultant. The Wilson family hurriedly organized an engagement announcement party, inviting relatives and friends for a grand celebration. Margaret met James for the first time. He was certainly an attractive man. He wore expensive suits well and treated her parents with refined manners. The engagement ring sparkling on Emily's left hand was clearly an expensive diamond. "Emily is such a lucky girl," Linda said with tears in her eyes. "To be able to marry such a wonderful man." Robert nodded with satisfaction too. "James has a respectable profession, so I feel comfortable entrusting our daughter to him." Throughout the party, Margaret stayed quietly in the corner. No one tried to talk to her, and all attention was directed toward Emily and James. Occasionally, Margaret would look at James with a complex expression, but no one noticed. When wedding preparations began in earnest, Margaret was completely left out. She was excluded from all the consultations about venue selection, dress fittings, and menu decisions. "You have different taste," Emily said without malice. "I want our wedding to be elegant and refined. If you get involved, it might turn out rather plain somehow." Margaret said nothing. This was treatment she was accustomed to. And then, the decisive moment finally arrived. The wedding invitations were printed and distribution to relatives and friends began. However, not a single one was handed to Margaret. "If you come, well, it might dampen the atmosphere, you know," Robert said.
"Do you know some people earn over $10,000 a month just by posting Reddit stories on YouTube? No face, no voice, just a laptop. I do it too, link below if you're curious."
Awkwardly. "It's Emily's special day, so let's just leave her be." Margaret smiled quietly. "I understand, Dad. I don't mind." 2 weeks before the wedding, Margaret received a phone call from her mother Linda at her apartment. It was around 6 o'clock in the evening when Margaret was working on logo design revisions for a client. "Margaret, good work today. I need to talk to you about the wedding." Linda's voice sounded subtly awkward. "I know, Mom. I'm not invited, right?" Margaret answered without stopping her work. "I'm glad you understand. It's Emily's special day, so we want to make it as perfect as possible for her. You understand, don't you?" "Of course," Margaret answered calmly. "If Emily can be happy, that's what matters most." Linda sighed with relief. Thank you so much. You're such a good girl. But I feel sorry for making you feel lonely. I wish there was some way to make it up to you. Don't worry about it. I'm busy with work anyway, so it might actually be helpful. After hanging up, Margaret leaned back in her chair. Listening to her mother's apologetic voice made her feel more sad than angry. Even though they were family, why was she always the one excluded? The next afternoon, this time Emily called. Her voice was as bright and bouncy as always. Sister, about the wedding, I'll send you a video because I feel sorry for you. A video? That's right. We're hiring a professional cameraman, so it'll be really high quality. You'll feel like you're right there. But filming and editing will cost $500, so you'll have to pay for that. Margaret felt her grip tighten on the receiver. Not only was her sister not inviting her to her own wedding, but she was demanding money as compensation. $500. It's cheap, isn't it? A regular cameraman would cost over $1,000. But since he's an acquaintance, it's a special price. Think of it as a wedding gift, Emily laughed cheerfully. Margaret took a deep breath. Yes, that's a lovely idea. Right? I'm so thoughtful. I thought you might feel lonely staying home all the time. Thank you, Emily. By the way, could I send you a video too? As a wedding celebration. There was a brief pause on the other end of the phone. Huh? I don't need it. Your taste is a bit too plain. I want our wedding to be sophisticated. Don't worry. I think you'll like it. I think it will be very interesting content. Interesting? You're not planning to make some handmade slideshow or something, are you? Emily laughed through her nose. No, something more practical. I've gathered information that will be useful for your newlywed life. Practical? What could you possibly know about marriage? Well, if you absolutely insist, I'll accept it, but nothing weird, okay? Don't worry. I think you'll be grateful. After hanging up, Margaret smiled meaningfully. She looked at the filing cabinet in the corner of her room and murmured, "What is family, I wonder?" Actually, Margaret had something that bothered her about Emily's fiancé James. From the first time she met him, she had felt something was off. There were contradictions in what he said, and he often became vague when talking about his past. Regarding his profession too, he tended to change the subject when trying to discuss specifics. At the party, Margaret casually brought up work with James. Investment consulting, what specifically does that work involve? Ah, that's complicated. It's difficult to explain to ordinary people, James smiled vaguely. But thanks to it, I have a stable income, so I can make Emily happy. Which company do you work for? I'm freelance. I have contracts with several investment firms. It's difficult to mention names due to contractual obligations. At that moment, Margaret sensed a slight agitation in James's expression. However, none of the other family members seemed to notice. Her parents and Emily were completely charmed by James's refined appearance and sweet words. Margaret decided to secretly begin an investigation. At first, she tried searching the internet, but she found almost no public information about an investment consultant named James Painter. This was unnatural. If he were truly a successful investment consultant, there should be some record. So Margaret decided to consult with a private detective agency. It would cost money, but she considered it a necessary investment to protect her family. The detective's report arrived a week later. Its contents exceeded Margaret's worst expectations. The person named James Painter had multiple prior convictions. Records of marriage fraud, and theft were lined up. Moreover, many of his victims were young women similar to Emily. Margaret asked the detective to contact the victim women. 3 women agreed to testify. Their testimonies were horrifying. They had been deceived by sweet words, had all their assets stolen after marriage, and then one day James suddenly disappeared. He was really charming and seemed like the perfect man, one of them, a woman named Sarah, said through tears. But 2 months after we married, he disappeared with my savings and the $100,000 I had borrowed from my parents. Margaret had the testimonies recorded on video. This would be important evidence for conveying the truth to her family. With 1 week left until Emily's wedding, Margaret continued thinking of ways to save her family while feeling crushed by the weight of the truth that only she knew. On Saturday, the day of the wedding, Margaret spent time quietly in her apartment. Outside was the pleasant spring weather of May, ideal conditions for a wedding. Margaret had been working on client projects on her laptop since morning while drinking coffee. However, it was difficult to concentrate. In the afternoon, photos from the wedding began appearing one after another on social media from family and relatives. Emily's beautiful wedding dress, her happy kiss with James, the luxurious venue decorations, the smiling parents. Everything looked perfect. "She looks happy," Margaret murmured while looking at the screen. Deep in her heart, she wished her investigation had been wrong. However, the materials she had received from the detective were clear. James Painter, real name Jason Miller, was a repeat offender who had committed marriage fraud in multiple states. Margaret took out a DVD from her desk drawer. It was something she had carefully edited over the past week. Testimonies from victims, police arrest records, and numerous court documents. She had compiled everything into one video. The next day, Sunday, Margaret sent the DVD to her family home by express mail. The enclosed card had a message written in careful cursive script: "Congratulations on your lovely wedding. This is my celebration gift to you. I think it will be helpful for your new life. With love, Margaret." Tuesday night, Emily and James, who had returned from their honeymoon, were having dinner with her parents at their house. Linda had prepared special dishes for the newlyweds, and Robert had opened expensive wine. "How was the honeymoon?" Robert asked with satisfaction. "It was wonderful, Dad," Emily smiled happily. "James arranged everything, and it was truly like a dream. Seeing young couples like you reminds us of when we were young," Linda said, narrowing her eyes. After dinner, Linda said as if remembering, "Oh yes, a video arrived from Margaret. It seems to be a congratulatory message. From my sister." Emily showed a slightly surprised expression. "That's unusual. But it's probably nothing special. Since she went to the trouble, let's watch it," Robert suggested. Margaret probably meant well in her own way. The four of them moved to the living room and sat in front of the large TV. James sat somewhat tiredly on the edge of the sofa. When Linda inserted the disc into the DVD player, the screen went dark and quiet music began to play. At first nothing appeared, just a black screen. "What is this? Is it broken?" Emily tilted her head. Then text appeared on the screen: "Truth sometimes comes with pain. However, you have the right to know." "What's this about?" Emily looked confused. Next appeared a mountain of official documents. The enlarged documents clearly bore the name, James Painter. And below that were the words, "Arrest record." James's face turned pale. This must be some mistake. However, the screen relentlessly displayed details. Marriage fraud, theft, and multiple uses of false names. Criminal records were lined up. "This has the same name as James, doesn't it?" Emily's voice was trembling. "But people with the same name are common, right?" Robert and Linda held their breath watching the screen. The documents also included birthdates, which completely matched what James had told them. "It's a coincidence," James desperately tried to explain. "There are people in the world with the same name and the same birthday." However, the screen moved to the next stage. 3 women appeared in turn, each beginning to tell their experiences. The first to appear was a blonde woman. "My name is Sarah Johnson. 2 years ago, I married a man named James Painter. Emily's hands were shaking. Who is this person? He said he was an investment consultant. He seemed very charming, kind, and like the perfect man. But 2 months after marriage, he disappeared with my savings of $100,000 and $50,000 I had borrowed from my parents. A second woman appeared. I'm Jennifer Brown. 3 years ago, I was deceived by the same man. He stole all my assets. My house, my car, everything. The third woman spoke through tears. I'm Lisa Williams. He proposed to me and said he was starting a new investment business, and he swindled the $200,000 in life insurance money from my deceased husband. I have 2 children. The living room fell completely silent. James tried to stand up, but his legs were unsteady. This is a lie. It's a fabrication, he shouted. Someone is trying to frame me. However, the screen displayed even more decisive evidence. His mug shots at the police station, fingerprints, and records of guilty verdicts in court. Everything was clearly recorded as James Painter, alias Jason Miller. Finally, Margaret's voice could be heard. Emily, and all my family. This is my wedding gift to you. I thought you had the right to know the truth, so I conducted this investigation. His real name is Jason Miller. Over the past 10 years, he has deceived at least 12 women. The total damage exceeds $3 million. Emily covered her face with both hands and began to shake. It's a lie, it must be a lie. Emily, haven't Dad and Mom already given him money? According to my investigation, he always tries to extort money from family members too. As investment opportunities or business funds. Robert and Linda looked at each other. Indeed, last month James had consulted them about a new investment opportunity. They hadn't made a decision yet, but they had been considering investing $300,000. And precisely because we're family, I felt I had to tell you the truth. Even though I wasn't invited to the wedding, you are all my precious family. When the video ended, the living room was enveloped in deathly silence. James began walking toward the window. Where do you think you're going? Robert asked in a stern voice. For a walk. I want to cool my head a bit. I need to think of a way to clear up this ridiculous suspicion. At that moment, Father Robert picked up the phone with shaking hands. While dialing Margaret's number, his voice was hoarse. Margaret, come right now. Immediately. When Margaret arrived at her family home, the living room was in complete chaos. Emily was collapsed on the sofa crying, Linda was rubbing her back with trembling hands. Robert was standing, repeatedly running his hands through his hair. And James was standing by the window looking outside while desperately talking to someone on his cell phone. It's mistaken identity. There are tons of people with the same name. James was shouting at whoever was on the other end of the phone. This is someone's conspiracy. Margaret quietly entered through the front door and observed her family's condition. She had rushed over in 30 minutes after receiving her father's call, but the situation seemed to have already become serious. Margaret. Robert spotted her and rushed over. Is this true? Are the things shown in this video facts? Everything is true, Dad, Margaret answered calmly. I hired a private detective and investigated for 3 weeks. His real name is Jason Miller. He's a repeat offender who has deceived at least 12 women over the past 10 years. Emily looked up. Her face with makeup ruined by tears was miserable. But sister, this might be a mistake. Detectives can make mistakes too, can't they? Margaret opened the file she was holding. The social security numbers match completely too. Fingerprints, photographs, everything. James hung up the phone and turned around. His face was pale and sweat was beading on his forehead. Won't you believe me? I'm working hard for my beloved wife. Then please explain, Margaret said calmly. If you say you're an investment consultant, which company do you work for? What's your specific work history? I can't discuss details due to contractual obligations. How convenient, Margaret said with sarcasm. But I've felt something was off since we first met. Your stories have too many contradictions. Robert spoke heavily. Margaret, why didn't you tell us earlier? Why didn't you let us know before the wedding? Margaret looked at her father. Dad, I wasn't invited to the wedding. I was told it would dampen the atmosphere. So I felt like I was no longer considered family. Linda gasped. Margaret, that's not. But precisely because we're family, I investigated the truth. Even though I was excluded, I wanted to protect all of you. Emotion crept into Margaret's voice. At the meeting, I felt something was off about James's stories, so I began the investigation. James suddenly became aggressive. This is defamation. I'll take legal action. Go ahead, Margaret was unfazed. But before that, shouldn't you contact the police? There might be a warrant out for your arrest. Then shocking facts came to light. Linda said in a trembling voice, Robert, that investment talk. Robert covered his face. $300,000. Last week, I gave $300,000 to James's investment business. What? Margaret was stunned. $300,000. Emily also looked up. I did too. I also transferred $50,000 of my savings to his account. He said it was for a down payment on a new house. Margaret quickly checked her file. According to victim testimonies, he always extorts money from family members too. As investment opportunities or business funds. Robert collapsed into a chair. That was our retirement fund. Since the pension alone wouldn't be enough, I thought we should try to increase it a little. Dad, it might not be too late yet. Margaret took out her cell phone. Let's contact the bank right now and have them stop the transaction. However, James was already moving. He was quietly walking toward the front door. Where are you going? Emily screamed. I just want to get some fresh air. Let's discuss this calmly. Margaret immediately called 911. Police. There's a marriage fraudster here. He's trying to escape now. James started running. However, Margaret had already provided detailed information to the police. She had consulted in advance about his car license plate, physical characteristics, and the possibility of escape. 20 minutes later, the sound of police sirens could be heard. The officers arrested James at a nearby gas station. Multiple forged identification documents and large amounts of cash were found in his car. The police officer who returned to the living room explained, this man's real name is Jason Miller. He was wanted nationwide. Thanks to your report, we were finally able to arrest him. Emily was collapsed in tears. I was such a fool. How could I not notice? Margaret sat next to her sister and gently embraced her. Emily, you're not to blame. He was very cunning. He's a professional con artist. The police officer continued, he's an expert in psychological manipulation. We don't blame the victims. Rather, your sister's quick action prevented further damage. Robert asked in a trembling voice, our money, will it come back? We've frozen his accounts. We can't say it will be the full amount, but we expect to recover a considerable portion, the police officer gave them hope. Linda turned to Margaret. How much did you spend on detective fees? $20,000, Margaret answered. But including additional costs for interviewing victims, another $5,000. But it's cheap if it means protecting my family. Emily looked up. Sister, why did you go so far? We treated you terribly. Margaret smiled. Even though I was excluded, you're my family. Family is a relationship where we protect each other, isn't it? Robert took his daughter's hand. Margaret, we were wrong. We disregarded you and only doted on Emily. But you were truly the family's support. Linda also said through tears, if you hadn't been there, we would have lost everything. Our retirement funds, our house, everything. That night, after the police questioning ended, the four of them sat around the same table for the first time in a long while. Linda prepared a simple dinner, and everyone was exhausted but somehow relieved. Sister, Emily said quietly. I'm truly sorry. Not inviting you to the wedding, charging you for the video, everything was wrong. That's all in the past now, Margaret answered. What's important is that we're family. And from now on, we should be honest with each other. Robert sighed deeply. Family isn't just for convenient times. Margaret, I'm truly sorry for excluding you. Margaret looked around at her family. I think family is a relationship where we can tell each other the truth. Even if that truth is painful, we're people who want to protect each other. That night, Margaret spent the night at her family home for the first time in a long while. The family bonds that had been lost for so long were finally beginning to be repaired. 3 months later, Jason Miller was sentenced to 8 years in prison. In court, the victims that Margaret had found also took the witness stand, and the full extent of his crimes was revealed. Similar fraud cases in other states also came to light, and additional charges were expected to extend his sentence even further. A victims' association was formed, and with Margaret's cooperation, they succeeded in recovering some assets. The Wilson family was also able to recover $200,000 of Robert's $300,000, and Emily got back her full $50,000. It wasn't complete recovery, but it avoided dealing a fatal blow to their retirement. At Thanksgiving in November, the family of 4 gathered around the dining table together for the first time in a long while. This year, Margaret was in charge of cooking for the first time. The roast turkey and pumpkin pie she made received rave reviews from her family. My taste isn't bad, is it? Margaret said with a smile. It's wonderful, Linda was genuinely grateful. You had cooking talent too. I'm sorry I never noticed. Emily had lost her former glamour but had somehow gained a more settled atmosphere. The experience of marriage fraud had changed her greatly. I'm really sorry, Emily said with tears. We misunderstood the meaning of family. You don't need to apologize anymore, Margaret squeezed her sister's hand. What's important is what we do from now on. Robert raised his wine glass. Family isn't just for convenient times. Margaret, I deeply regret excluding you. Linda also continued, if you hadn't been there, we would have lost everything. You taught us what a daughter's true love really means. Margaret looked around at her family. I think family is a relationship where we can tell each other the truth. People we want to protect even if we might be disliked. After dinner, the 4 spent time relaxing together in the living room. The Thanksgiving parade was being broadcast on TV, but everyone was truly at peace. Emily spoke up. If Sister hadn't stopped me, I might have become an accomplice too. I was planning to recommend investing in his business. But we were able to realize it. That's what's most important, Margaret answered. Robert added, Margaret's courageous action prevented more victims. You're a true hero. That night, Margaret spent time at her family home for the first time in a long while. In her old room, looking at the starry sky outside the window, she reflected on the events of the past few months. The sense of alienation from her family, anxiety about the investigation, and the courage to tell the truth. Everything had led to today's peaceful dinner. The next morning, at the breakfast table, Emily talked about her new plans. I want to continue my beauty work while starting volunteer work to support fraud victims. That's a wonderful idea, Margaret offered her support. I'll help with my graphic design skills too. Robert and Linda also decided to participate in fraud prevention seminars for elderly people in the community. They wanted to share their experience to prevent similar damage. By Christmas time, the the Wilson family had completely built a new relationship. Now all four were on equal footing, having become a true family that respected each other. Margaret was no longer an outsider but was cherished as a central figure in the family. Jason Miller was serving time in prison. Other fraud cases continued to come to light, and his release was expected in 15 years. The total damage exceeded $5 million, but Margaret's actions had prevented further expansion of the damage. When the new year arrived, Margaret set new goals with her family. To be honest with each other, to ask for help without hesitation when in trouble, and above all, to continue cherishing family bonds. True family, the four members of the Wilson family realized, is not just about blood relations, but a relationship where people can care for and protect each other. And that bond had become much stronger than before.